Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring, which is all about the folklore of weasels. I wanted to jump on and do a quick intro before I started the episode proper because there's a little issue with the sound, and I wanted to let you know it's not an equipment problem or sound problem. The problem is that I recorded this while the cicadas were at their height of singing for the evening. So I wanted to let you know that the background noise that you hear is in fact screaming cicadas, and I thought I would give you a little bit of bonus cicada lore before I start the episode, and hopefully that will help you enjoy the nature in the background a little bit more. Now, the earliest documented examples of cicada folklore come from China, where there are stone carvings of the bug dated back to 1500 BCE. Now, because cicadas shed their, outer shell, and they would often leave the empty shell on a tree and begin their adult life in a new winged body, the Chinese regarded cicadas as symbols of rebirth. And they would carve cicadas out of jade and place them on a corpse's tongue before burial. And the belief there was that those deceased individuals would emerge out of their decaying bodies and achieve some sort of immortality. So that was a belief there. Now, looking at ancient Greece, cicadas were considered to be devoted to the gods, and they believed that cicadas only consumed song and heavenly bliss, not food or water. Of course, that's not true. It's also not true that cicadas damage trees and other plants because they don't have the kind of mouths that would bite and chew on things. Their mouth is more like what you'd think of in a mosquito, where it sort of penetrates and then, sucks. So they actually eat tree sap, usually from really young twigs and branches and stuff. Now, Socrates and other philosophers described the song of the cicadas as divine diversion. And according to the ancient myths, cicadas were once humans whom the gods changed into creatures that could sing until they died because those people had such a strong love for music. There is a tale of Eos, who is the goddess of the dawn, and was known to the Romans as Aurora. Now, she had a lover, Tithonius of Troy, who was human, and Eos asked Zeus to grant her lover immortality because she wanted to be with him. But yeah, even sometimes goddesses don't read the fine print because she forgot to ask Zeus for her lover to have eternal youth as well. And as a result of that, she doomed Tithonus to remain alive, but to grow so old that he sank into a toothless decrepitude and then prayed that he might die. Now, Eos understood that the gods never rescinded their gifts, but not knowing what else to do, she locked him in a room in this terrible state and changed him into a cicada that was endlessly complaining. If we look toward Native American beliefs, cicadas were connected to rain and fertility, according to some tribes, like the Hopi and the Apache. And the arrival of cicadas was interpreted as an indication of impending rain and abundant crops. So just wanted to jump on and explain my cicada problem, and hopefully it's not too annoying. I think you can still hear me just fine, but you can also hear them in the background. So I hope you enjoyed the extra bonus cicada lore. In the mountains of Japan, when the wind howls sharp and sudden, people whisper of strange spirits racing through the air. They're called kamaitachi, the sickle weasels. It is said they travel in threes. Invisible to human eyes, they ride upon whirlwinds faster than thought. The first weasel knocks its victim to the ground. The second strikes, its claws like shining sickles, slashing deep cuts across the flesh. And the third weasel follows, pouring medicine into the wounds so they heal quickly, leaving no scar. Those who rise after an encounter find themselves bewildered, cut and bleeding, but with no pain. And before they can cry out, the marks are already healing. Some say the Kamitachi are tricksters, playing cruel games with humans. Others whisper that they are punishers, riding the storm to strike down the arrogant. And still others believe they are protectors, that their strange healing is a gift as much as their claws are a curse. Are the Kamitachi demons, spirits of the wind, or just the fleeting shapes of ferrets and weasels made larger than life by human fear of the unseen? Whatever the truth, the people of Japan still tell their stories, warning travelers in the mountains to beware the rushing wind, for when it whistles too sharply, too suddenly, you may feel the touch of the sickle weasels. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring. And as you might have figured out, this episode is going to be all about ferrets and weasels. Now, initially, it was just going to be about ferrets, but as they are closely related, I found a lot of the folklore was overlapping. And why ferrets, you might ask? Well, recently, I was in a ritual and I was gifted a familiar by the person running the ritual, and that familiar is a ferret. So I am definitely very focused on ferrets right now and very excited about researching them, figuring out what they're all about, and connecting. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And there's some very unusual folklore around weasels and ferrets. So I'm going to get into all of that. But before I do, I want to tell you how I've been folkloring lately. Now, in my last episode, I was talking about gathering herbs, and I'm still doing that, so much of that. And hopefully, because it's now early September, I haven't waited too long for my first harvest, and I'll still be able to have a second harvest before the frost comes. So fingers crossed on that. But what I've been doing with the herbs, I've been drying them, I've been making tinctures. My cucumbers are essentially done right now, which is sad because I love my little pickling cukes. I eat them like crazy. But very exciting that my eggplants are doing amazing right now. And I've got so many. Last year, I think I got 2 total. And right now, I think there are 8 that are on my 2 plants that I have. So super excited about that. So again, it's fall. It's very, very early fall. So I'm focusing on finishing up the end of summer cleanup, getting ready to batten down the hatches for winter, although not quite there yet. So that's kind of what I've been focused on. I also went away on a retreat weekend and just ran around in the woods, did a whole bunch of ritual, and generally had a fantastic time away from real life. I needed it so desperately. So that's what I've been doing lately. Okay, so all things ferret and weasel. Now, the ferret and its close kin, the weasel, has in history been known as protectors, tricksters, spirit guides, and sort of supernatural beings overall. So what is a weasel? Now, the weasels and ferrets are both from the family group Mustelidae. I hope I said that right. Which is the largest family in the order of Carnivora. And it includes badgers, otters, mink, polecats, stoats, and even wolverines, and amongst others. Now, there's a question out there, are ferrets actually polecats? And it is generally agreed that European polecats are sort of the wild ancestors of our current domesticated ferrets, so definitely related. And ferrets are believed to have been bred from polecats more than 2,000 years ago for the specific purpose of hunting rodents, such as rats and mice. So, a little bit of some facts about weasels before I get into the folklore and history. A couple of weasel behaviors, and there's lots of them, but specifically, weasels do something called a war dance. And this is a form of behavior, and they sort of, looks like they're dancing around, and they do kind of a series of excited hops sideways and backwards. They often have an arched back while they're doing it, and they make a series of kind of clucking noises while they do. They use this behavior to disorient and confuse prey before they attack. In domesticated ferrets, they will do the same kind of thing, but usually it's kind of a more playful behavior, which they sort of, capture toys or other objects. But, it's that instinctual behavior of the hunt. Another thing that ferrets specifically do is called dooking, and there are lots of vocalizations that ferrets make, and I'm not going to get into all of those, although very interesting if you're interested in weasel and ferret behavior. Now, dooking is a noise that they make. It's like this guttural noise, and it sounds a little bit like a chuckle. And there are several different specific kinds of dooking that a ferret might make. The chuckle is like a very playful ferret. It's, a content ferret that's just having fun. There is a happy dook that is signifying excitement, joy, wanting to play. There's a dominance dook that is, while a ferret is roughhousing or to sort of assert a superior status. There's also an annoyed dook, which is kind of like a warning and back off, right? Also, there's something called a hob song, which is a dook that is specifically for male ferrets that are courting female ferrets. And I definitely looked that up, and I wanted to hear all of that. There is a final dook, and this is spelled D-O-O-K, so dooking is, that's how that's spelled. The maternal dook, in which a female ferret is calling to her kits, right? Okay, so that's a little bit about ferrets. I'm sure you've seen images of ferrets and weasels. So they do have, specific personalities, just like any other domestic, companion animal that you would see out there. But those were a couple of fun things that I found. And like I said, lots and lots of other vocalizations. If you're interested in, or if you have a ferret, you can look those up. So, mythological and folkloric stories about ferrets. Now, the first one I want to talk about is from Greek mythology, and it has to do with the goddess Hecate. And so, in Greek mythology, there was a woman, Galinthias, and she was a friend or perhaps a servant of Alcmene, the mother of Zeus's son, Heracles, Hercules, one of Zeus's son, because we all know he can't keep it in his pants, but that's a side note. Now, when Alcmene was in labor, Zeus's wife Hera was jealous, as she always was when he was stepping out on her, and she sent her daughter, who is the goddess of childbirth, to sit outside the bedroom where Alcmene was giving birth, with her legs crossed and held together by both hands with intertwined fingers. And that was to create some magic that would delay the delivery in order to foil Zeus's plans for the boy, for Hercules. Now, the labor continued on for days until Galinthius, in some accounts, aided by the Furies, tricked the daughter of Hera and announced the baby's birth. Now, this goddess was startled. She unclasped her hands, jumped to her feet, and suddenly that allowed Hercules to be born. Hera was not pleased by this turn of events, and as a punishment, she transformed Galinthius into a weasel. And so that was the punishment. Now, Hecate, however, took pity on her and transformed her back into human, made her an attendant of Hecate's, and later Hercules built her a temple. So in Greek mythology, weasels were considered connected to female reproduction. Now, another story about the weasel from Norse mythology. In some Norse traditions, Loki, who was a trickster god, was believed to take the form of a weasel or possibly a stoat when he was sneaking around, when he was doing tricky things, when he was stealing. And so just as, ferrets can slip into little holes and disappear, Loki used the weasel form to wriggle out of danger, at least that's what he wanted, sometimes into trouble. And so the symbolism here is that, the weasel, the ferret is cunning, they can shapeshift, trickery, just that particular kind of trickster. When we look at Chinese folklore, there is something that we have called the soul-stealing weasel. And in parts of northern China, the weasel is one of the 5 immortals, alongside the fox, the snake, the hedgehog, and the rat. And these are animals that are said to wield particular spiritual powers. And these weasels were believed to steal human souls or even possess people. However, they were also respected. And if there was a weasel kind of lingering around your house, a family might leave offerings to sort of stay in the weasel's favor, keep the power on your side. So the symbolism here we're looking at is they were feared, but deeply honored, and so kind of a creature of balance between, blessing and curse. So I think that's very interesting because that's not something you see elsewhere. When we look at Celtic and European folklore, we have something called the white weasel. And the white weasel was a good omen. And in Ireland and Britain, seeing a white stoat, also called ermine, was considered a sign of purity, a sign of protection. And the fur became a royal symbol in medieval Europe that represented innocence, being incorruptible. Now, if you harmed a weasel, that was thought to bring great misfortune. And people believed that if you killed a weasel, the whole weasel family would come
to you for revenge and attack you. So symbolism here was luck, sacred purity, but also vengeance if you weren't careful. Now, looking at medieval bestiary lore, they believed that the weasel birthed through the ear. So in medieval Europe, people believed that weasels conceived through their mouths and then they gave birth through their ears. So this very odd belief made them symbols of virginity, mystery, divine reproduction, and in some religious art, the weasel can appear as a symbol of the Immaculate Conception, and again, linking it with sort of sacred mysteries. So the symbolism is fertility, but like strange fertility, mystical birth, kind of back to some of these, strange Immaculate Conception birth kind of stories. So interesting. Now, looking at the Inuit, so there is amongst the Inuit tales of hunters who, when faced with impossible challenges, they would transform into weasels to slip past dangerous situations and complete whatever their quest was. And to the Inuit, the weasel embodied bravery, resourcefulness, survival in harsh conditions. So, symbolism here would be courage, adaptability, hidden strengths you didn't know of. We also have a weasel as a Malaysian demon cat. And this is called the bajang. And it is a vampiric creature that is often described as appearing in the form of a polecat. This creature will come up to your door and mew at the door. And this is not like a, cute little mewing. It is giving warning that it's going to attack. It is generally considered, if you hear this mewing outside your door, that a child in that house is going to die. And the bajang vampires like to feed on children, although not their only victims, but they prefer that. And like other kinds of vampires, they can spread madness and disease among humans. They're generally male, but not always. Now, how do you get these creatures? They can be born as bajangs from the souls of the dead, depending on what their deeds were in life. They can also be created by a living person. A person can be transformed into a bajang after death if they have committed evil deeds in their life. A person might also inherit a destiny of becoming one after death if that person's ancestors committed evil deeds. And, they might have passed those on, and then that person has a high probability of becoming one of these vampires after death. So talk about ancestral wounds right there. That is the worst to pass down. The way a living person can create a bajang is by summoning the soul of a stillborn child. And in many of the myths surrounding this vampire, the stillborn child must be freshly buried or must be taken before it's even buried, which is so horrific. What kind of person would even conceive of doing something so horrible, so terrible? Obviously they're going to create a monster from this horrific act. Now, if a person does create a bajang, the person who creates them can control who the creature attacks and or torments. So really, all around, like, villain, evil person, what kind of person would even conceive to do such a thing? Okay, so moving on from those specific weasel stories, let's talk about a little bit of symbolism and some archetypes. Now, some of the spirit animal archetypes, ferrets can symbolize keen observation, stealth, cunning, and also, interestingly, protective loyalty. They also represent curiosity, adaptability, tenacity, resourcefulness, and courage in navigating unseen realms. All that being said, they also stand for playfulness, vigor, optimism, and friendliness. And they remind us not to judge by appearances, to stay focused on our goals, and to embrace our curiosity. Because they are very playful, but they're also very serious hunters. And when they're focused on their prey, they are, absolutely focused on that goal. A little bit of folk medicine in ancient Greek. In those magical practices, weasel parts were incorporated into various charms and cures, especially in the context of fertility and childbirth. And we talked about that a little bit with Hecate and how those stories relate to female fertility. And the ferret is one of Hecate's sacred animals, and they might have been used symbolically in rituals of protection, of different magic, and of transformation. Now, direct references to ferret imagery in good luck or protective charms is fairly limited, but the embedding of weasel teeth into homes or ritual spaces suggests an early protective symbolism. In ancient Catalhoyuk, which was a large Neolithic city settlement in southern Anatolia, which existed from approximately 7500 BC to 5600 BC in what is current-day Turkey. There were weasel tooth talismans, and the weasel teeth were embedded in plaster wall decorations alongside other animal parts, which was possibly a protective practice, maybe some kind of early ritual. So that's kind of the first time that we saw weasel parts being used in some kind of magical practice. Now, in early modern Mecklenburg, which is in Germany, weasel-shaped amulets were believed to hold strong magical power. Weasel-shaped and weasel-derived, so with weasel body parts. Now, seasonal rituals for killing weasels coincided with sort of summery feast periods. So maybe 15 August to 8 September, which kind of suggested, again, some sort of ritual association. Now, in France, killing weasels was taboo. They were considered creatures not meant to be harmed, possibly carrying negative consequences if you did harm them. In Hebei folklore, which is from northern China, the, quote, wonderful weasel, unquote, appears among their sacred animals, capable of enriching families. They could also induce illnesses. They could foretell the future. And even sometimes they would possess mediums or even cause hysterical disorders. So very powerful creatures. When we look at Native North American beliefs, there were obviously, Native Americans are not a monolith. There are many different tribes, many different beliefs. The Shoshone believed that weasels were trickster spirits, which goes along with, a lot of other beliefs that we've been talking about. The Abenaki believed that weasels were linked to sorcery. Now, the Anishinaabe used pelts in medicine bags. They were symbols of healing. The Chippewa had a legend of something called the least weasel that was said to have defeated a Wendigo by climbing up into its anus. And I am not going to speculate on whether the Wendigo was defeated by being appalled or being appealed. That is really, I don't even want to know. Other tribes, such as the Blackfoot, the Plains, the Tlingit, weasels symbolized protection for them, sacred life-death cycles, and also wealth. And their tails were carried as good luck charms in some cases. So, that is a lot of weasel lore. You wouldn't have expected that there would be that much just about weasels and ferrets. So, how can you use weasels in your practice? If you feel connected to weasels, certainly you can decide if that is a spirit animal that you want to connect to. You can use ferret and weasel symbolism in your day-to-day life, in your work. You can get yourself a ferret. They're super cute, and they are just have such great personalities. So maybe not the most folkloring I've ever come up with, but thought it was an interesting topic. And maybe like me, if you are lucky enough to get a ferret as your familiar, you can do lots of work with those particular creatures. Now, I want to finish out this episode with another story for you about a weasel, and just wanted to remind you all, if you are wanting to connect, I am most active on Blue Sky. You can look for me under Folkloring. You can also see my new website, which is folkloringlife.com. And again, my book is out on pre-sales. It's called Mind Over Magic, and it is out through Crossed Crow Books. And I'll probably be talking a little bit more when I get closer to the release date, which is February 17th. So, on to our story, which is The Bride Turned Weasel. Once, long ago, in the villages of Greece, there lived a young woman. She was promised in marriage, but her bridegroom was very cruel. Her heart was heavy, and sorrow filled all her days. On the night before the wedding, she could bear it no more. She prayed to the gods and whispered, "Spare me from this fate. Do not bind me to this misery." And the gods answered, but not with mercy. Instead, they transformed her into a weasel. From that day forward, she was no longer a bride-to-be, but a shadow in the corners of houses. She crept through doorways. She gnawed at wedding dresses and tore at bridal gowns. And so, people said, she could not bear to see another woman happy. Every time a weasel appeared near the home of a bride, it was taken as a warning, a sign of misfortune, waiting just beyond the threshold. Families would leave offerings at the edge of the house, a scrap of bread, a drop of wine, hoping to appease the spirit within the weasel and to keep sorrow from the wedding day. But not everywhere was the weasel feared. In Macedonia, across the border, the belief was different. There, if a weasel lingered near the bride's house, it was seen as good luck, a sign that the marriage would be protected, that the bride's new home would prosper. And so in this tale, the weasel, kin to the ferret, holds two faces, an omen of sorrow and a guardian of joy. Just as with many creatures of folklore, its meaning depends on the eyes of those who watch it skitter past the door.
As always, thanks for listening to Folkloring. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Facebook or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.